When you hear the word worship, certain pictures come in your mind. Prayer, salah, hajj, sajda. Like these are acts of worship. And of course, making dua only to Allah. So when the ayah says, we will not worship anyone other than Allah, you could see immediately that it's saying, don't worship Jesus, only worship Allah. But I want you to expand the scope of the term ibadah, beyond worship. Worship for you and me is an act that we do at a certain time. We just prayed. We engaged in an act of worship. But when you leave the masjid and you get in your car and you're driving away, you would not normally think that you're at that moment engaged in an act of worship. But you are still a slave. You're still engaged in Allah's slavery. Slavery is an identity. Worship are some acts that take place within that identity. Right? But slavery is actually an identity. When you're sleeping, you're not worshiping. But when you're sleeping, you're still a slave. When you're eating food, you're not worshiping, but you're still a slave. So the idea here is slavery extends to all things I do in my life. It's an overarching sense of identity. This is what I live my life as. And a free person lives a life differently from a slave. Right? A free person has in mind, what am I going to do? What do I want? Where do I go? What are my choices? My. What is the slave thinking constantly? What does the master want? What is my master's priorities for me? Am I in line with what my master accepts? And even if the slaves have freedom too, but they have freedom within a fence. Right? They can't cross a fence. Like if the master says don't leave town, then they can go anywhere in town, but they can't leave town because the master said. Okay? Or master says come back by this time, they're going to come back by that time. There are time limits on them. There are space limits on them. There are behavior limits on them. Master says don't go this way then. In other words, you cannot actually accept slavery without accepting authority. When it says we shall not worship, when the translation is we shall not worship anyone other than Allah, then the problem is if you limit that discussion to we're only going to pray to God and not pray to Jesus, that's only painting part of the picture of ibadah. It's actually saying we're not going to accept the mastery, the ultimate final authority of anyone other than Allah. Let's come to terms with that. Let's understand that worship is simply a reminder that we're slaves. Let me say that again. Worship is only a reminder that we are slaves. If worship is not reinforcing your slavery, then you're missing the point of worship. Because that's the entire point is what happens between the prayers. The prayer is supposed to help you with what's going to happen between the prayers. Am I going to act as a slave between the prayers? Now what the problem with the Christians was they reduced their relationship with God to just worship. And in everything else, they do whatever they want. You understand? Give Sunday to God, and then the rest is mine. You understand? And Allah is telling them, come back to common terms that originally Allah didn't just want worship from us, He wanted slavery from us. Allah na'buda illallah. Then He adds, وَلَا نُشْرِكَ بِهِ شَيْئًا. And we will not associate, as a result of that slavery, we will not associate anything with Him. Now you appreciate, worship no one but Allah and commit no shirk. Seems like the same thing. If you say don't worship anyone other than Allah, isn't that the same thing as saying we're not going to do any shirk? There seems some sort of a redundancy between these two phrases. But actually one is a result of the other. It is, if you understand the comprehensive definition of slavery, not worship. We are absolutely going to accept Allah's mastery over us, which is why we are not going to allow anyone to have anywhere near that level of authority as Allah does. We will never put anyone in that place. La nushrika bihi shay'an. It's not just about worship. It's about placing someone in a position of authority.